How dare you touch his wife? He didn't hesitate as his fist connected with her jaw, the crack of bone echoing through the rain-soaked entrance while the bass still pounded inside. Maria didn't scream. She didn't even beg as she crumpled onto the slick black pavement, her dark cocktail dress clinging to the wet ground like spilled ink. She stayed down, her chest rising with controlled breaths, her eyes wide but strangely focused, as if she knew something her ex-boyfriend didn't. Because the moment his hand left her face, 3 black Mercedes were already pulling up to the curb, and the man stepping out of the center vehicle owned far more than just this luxury club they were standing outside of. If this story of buried trauma and calculated reckoning pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable journey dropping tomorrow. While you're here, jump into the comments and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing our global community. Alright, let's step back into the rain. Maria. The shove had come without warning. She'd stumbled backward, her heel catching on the wet threshold between the club's golden interior and the storm-drenched street. Her shoulder blade struck the glass door frame, and the laughter from inside the VIP section cut off like someone had unplugged the night. Her ex stood over her, his breath clouded with imported vodka and the kind of entitlement that had survived 5 years without consequence. His leather jacket hung open, rain beating on his shoulders, his face twisted with the same expression she'd once mistaken for passion. Still pretending you're worth something, Maria? He spat, loud enough for the valets to hear, loud enough for the security cameras to catch every word. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm responding to everyone. Click subscribe, like this video. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want me to miss them. Now let's begin. The rain had turned the club's entrance into a mirror, and in it, Maria could see her ex's face, flushed, triumphant, exactly as it had been 5 years ago when she'd fled with nothing but a backpack and a broken rib. He was swaying now, one hand braced against the doorframe, the other flexing open and closed like he was still feeling the impact. His eyes had that glassy, distant look of someone who'd crossed from drunk into reckless hours ago, but his smile was sharp, present. He'd been waiting for this moment, she realized. Maybe for years. Look at you, he said, his voice carrying over the muted thrum of bass from inside. Designer dress, expensive heels, playing pretend in the big leagues now? He laughed. A wet, ugly sound that made the valet by the Mercedes look away. You think you've changed? You think you're someone now? Maria's cheek throbbed where his knuckles had landed, but she didn't touch it. Didn't give him the satisfaction. She pushed herself up slowly, palms flat against the cold, wet pavement, her hair hanging in dark curtains around her face. I'm not doing this with you, she said quietly. You don't get to decide that. He stepped forward, closing the distance she'd tried to create. Up close, she could smell the vodka on his breath, the same cologne he'd worn back then, like he'd been preserved in amber for half a decade. You left me looking like a fool, Maria. You remember that? Ran off in the middle of the night like some scared little... I left because you put me in the hospital. The words came out flat, factual. No tremor, no tears. That seemed to infuriate him more than if she'd screamed. His jaw clenched, and for a moment she saw the calculation behind the drunkenness, the way he was measuring her, looking for the cracks he used to exploit, the silence he used to fill with accusations until she apologized for things that weren't her fault, the space he used to occupy until she made herself smaller just to breathe. You always exaggerate, he said, his voice dropping into something almost reasonable, almost concerned. It was the tone he'd used with police officers, with her friends, with anyone who'd ever questioned the bruises. You were clumsy, emotional. I was trying to help you, and you made me out to be some kind of monster. Maria said nothing. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. There was no winning an argument with someone who rewrote reality to suit their narrative. He took her silence as submission. She could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his smile widened. He thought he'd won. Again. That's what I thought. He reached down, fingers moving toward her arm like he had the right to touch her, to pull her up, to decide when this was over. Come on. Let's go somewhere and talk like adults. You owe me that much. His hand never made contact. Maria's phone buzzed against her hip, a single vibration that cut through the moment like a blade. She didn't need to check it. She already knew what it said. Her ex didn't notice. He was still talking, still convinced he was in control, still operating under the assumption that Maria Cabrera was the same terrified girl who used to flinch at raised voices. Behind him, through the rain-streaked entrance, the club's head of security had stopped scanning IDs. The valets had gone still. Even the drunk couple stumbling out onto the street seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, the way air pressure changes before a storm breaks. Her ex was still smiling when the sound of car doors opening, 3 of them, in perfect unison, finally made him turn around. Maria's knees burned against the wet pavement, but she didn't move. Not yet. There was a specific kind of stillness she'd learned in those years with him. A survival instinct dressed up as obedience. Go quiet. Go small. Wait for the storm to pass. Except she wasn't that woman anymore. The realization hit her in fragments, like light through broken glass. She was on the ground, yes. Her dress was soaked through, yes. Her face throbbed where his fist had connected, and she could taste copper at the corner of her mouth. But underneath the physical pain, underneath the old familiar fear that wanted to crawl up her throat and make her apologize, there was something else. Calm. Cold. Absolute calm. She watched him through the wet strands of her hair, watched him preen and posture for an audience that had already gone silent. He thought this was the same dance. The same roles. He'd push, she'd break, and the world would keep spinning because that's what it had always done. He didn't know she'd stopped breaking 3 years ago. The urge to explain herself rose like bile. To tell him she'd built a life he couldn't touch, that she'd survived him and become someone he'd never recognize, that she had a name now that carried weight in rooms he'd never be allowed to enter. But she swallowed it all down, let it settle somewhere beneath her ribs where he couldn't reach it. Begging had never worked anyway. She remembered the night she'd tried, really tried, to make him understand what he was doing to her. She'd knelt on their apartment floor, much like she was kneeling now, and she'd asked him, please just let her go to her sister's for the weekend. Just a few days to breathe. She'd promised to come back. Promised she wasn't leaving him. He'd locked the door and pocketed the key. That memory should have made her feel small. Instead, it made her feel sharp. Her phone buzzed again. Twice this time. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. Lawrence never called unless he was already close, and 2 buzzes meant he could see her. The thought should have brought relief, but what she felt was something more complicated. Shame, maybe, that she'd ended up on the ground again. That her past had found her in a designer dress and expensive heels, had found her happy, and had tried to drag her back down to where he thought she belonged. Or maybe it wasn't shame. Maybe it was rage. She'd spent 5 years teaching herself not to feel this, not to let the anger consume her the way it had consumed him. She'd gone to therapy. She'd built boundaries. She'd learned that healing didn't mean revenge, that closure didn't require confrontation. But watching him now, watching him flex his hand like he was proud of what he'd done, like hitting her was some kind of accomplishment, she felt the careful architecture of her recovery crack just slightly. She wanted him to know, wanted him to understand what he'd just done, who he'd just touched. The words sat behind her teeth like loaded weapons. Do you have any idea who I am now? Do you know what you've just started? But she didn't say them, because the women in movies screamed those lines. They threatened and promised, and gave the villain time to run. Maria had learned something more valuable than threats in the years since she'd left him. Silence had gravity. The longer she stayed quiet, the more the air around them seemed to tighten. The valets weren't moving. The security guard had stepped back from the door, his hand hovering near his radio. Even the rain seemed to fall more deliberately, each drop a countdown. Her ex was still talking, but his voice had taken on a new edge. Uncertainty creeping in at the corners. Maria tilted her head up, rain washing the blood from her lip, and smiled, not at him, at the man stepping out of the center Mercedes. The couple who'd been stumbling toward the valet stand froze mid-step, then turned back toward the club entrance like they'd forgotten something inside. They hadn't. Maria watched them disappear into the golden warmth of the lobby, walking just a little too fast to be casual. The valet who'd been standing by the Mercedes, young, maybe 23, with styled hair and a name tag that read Jeremy, suddenly became very interested in his phone. His thumb moved across the screen without purpose, just motion for the sake of looking busy, looking elsewhere, looking at anything except the woman on the ground and the man standing over her. Maria had seen this before. This collective turning away. This silent agreement that whatever was happening wasn't anyone's problem but hers. Inside the club, faces pressed against the glass doors, backlit by purple and gold. A woman in a silver dress had her hand over her mouth. A man beside her pulled out his phone, angled it toward the scene, then seemed to think better of it, and lowered it slowly. They were close enough to help, close enough to call out, to interrupt, to simply bear witness in a way that mattered. No one moved. The security guard, the one who'd been checking IDs with military precision just minutes ago, had retreated to the far side of the entrance. He stood with his back against the brick, his radio clipped to his belt, but his hand nowhere near it. His eyes tracked the scene with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned exactly when to notice things and when to develop sudden, convenient blindness. This was the math people did in their heads when violence was happening to someone else. Risk versus reward, involvement versus safety. The possibility that stepping in might redirect the danger toward them, And wasn't it terrible? Wasn't it awful? But also, wasn't it smarter to just not? Maria understood it. She'd done it herself once, years ago, before she'd learned what it felt like to be on this side of the equation. She'd seen a woman arguing with a man in a parking lot, had seen the moment the argument turned physical, and she'd sat in her car with her hand on the ignition, telling herself it wasn't her business, that she didn't know the full story, that getting involved might make things worse. She'd driven away. She still remembered the woman's face. Her ex was saying something about how no one cared, how no one was coming to save her, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. He'd noticed it too, the way the crowd had thinned, the way the air had changed. People weren't just looking away anymore. They were leaving. A group of women in cocktail dresses had been standing near the entrance, waiting for their ride. Now they were halfway down the block, heels clicking against wet pavement in double time. A bachelor party that had been loud and obnoxious moments ago had gone silent, their leader making urgent gestures toward the side street. Even the music from inside seemed muted now, like someone had turned down the volume or closed a door that had been open. The head of security's radio crackled. Maria couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the way his face changed, saw the moment he recognized something in whatever message had just come through. He looked at Maria, then at the Mercedes, then at her ex, and something shifted in his expression. Not concern, not sympathy. Calculation. He touched his earpiece, murmured something too quiet to hear, and took 3 deliberate steps backward, putting himself completely out of the scene. His body language was clear. He'd seen nothing. He was responsible for nothing. Whatever was about to happen had nothing to do with him. Jeremy the valet had disappeared entirely. Just gone, his phone abandoned on the stand. The club doors swung shut with a hydraulic hiss, cutting off the purple light and leaving only street lamps and the red glow of the Mercedes taillights. Maria's ex finally noticed. Finally felt the weight of all that absence. What the? The car doors opened. The headlights cut through the rain like surgical lights, 3 sets of them, arranged in a perfect arc that boxed in the club entrance. High beams on Mercedes S-Class sedans, the kind that cost more than most people's houses, idling with the synchronized precision of a military formation. Maria felt the light on her face before she heard the engines, felt the way it pushed back the darkness and made the rain look like falling diamonds. Her ex squinted against it, raising one hand to shield his eyes, and in that gesture she saw the first real crack in his armor. The center vehicle's door opened first. No rushed movements, no dramatic exits, just the smooth hydraulic release of a door that cost what most cars did, and then a polished leather shoe touching wet pavement. Then another. The man who emerged moved with the kind of unhurried confidence that only came from knowing, truly knowing, that time would wait for you. Lawrence Zhang stood 6'2" in the rain, his white dress shirt already darkening with water, his tattoos visible through the wet fabric. He didn't bother with an umbrella, didn't rush toward shelter. He simply stood there, rain streaming down his face, his eyes locked on Maria with an intensity that made the temperature drop. Then the other doors opened. From the left Mercedes, 2 men in black suits, their movements synchronized like they'd rehearsed this. From the right, 2 more. All of them built like they'd been selected for physicality first and everything else second. All of them moving with the same deliberate calm as Lawrence, fanning out to create a perimeter that turned the club entrance into a stage. No one ran. No one shouted. The silence was worse than any threat. Maria watched her ex's face as he tracked the new arrivals, watched the drunken confidence drain away like water through his fingers. He was still standing over her, still had his hand half raised like he might strike again, but his weight had shifted backward. Instinct recognizing danger before conscious thought could catch up. "The fuck is this?" he said, but his voice had gone thin. Lawrence didn't answer. He walked forward, rain pooling in his wake, and the men in suits moved with him like satellites orbiting a planet. They weren't there to intimidate. They were there because this was how Lawrence moved through the world, surrounded by the visible evidence of his power, wearing it as casually as other men wore watches. The club's head of security had pressed himself flat against the wall now, his hands visible and empty, his face carefully blank. He knew. Maria could see it in the way he held himself, in the way he absolutely refused to make eye contact with anyone. Whatever radio message he'd received had told him exactly who was arriving and exactly how far out of the way he needed to get. One of the suited men, the one who'd emerged from the right vehicle first, moved toward the club entrance and placed something small and black against the door mechanism. A moment later, the hydraulic locks engaged with a heavy thunk that echoed down the street. No one was getting in. No one was getting out. The drunk couple who'd fled earlier were visible at the corner now, looking back but not approaching. A taxi slowed, saw the scene, and accelerated without stopping. Maria's ex took a step backward. Just one, Just enough to put space between himself and Maria, like distance might somehow erase what he'd done. Like the rain might wash away the evidence of his hand on her face. Lawrence stopped 3 feet from Maria, close enough that she could see the water beating on his eyelashes, could see the absolute stillness in his expression. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been loud, hot, impulsive. This was something colder. He looked at Maria once, a question in his eyes that only she could read. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head slightly. "Not badly." Then Lawrence turned his full attention to the man who'd put his wife on the ground, and the rain seemed to fall harder. Lawrence didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "That's my wife." 3 words, delivered in English with barely a trace of accent, each one landing like a door closing. Not a claim of possession, a statement of fact, a redrawing of every assumption her ex had made in the last 5 minutes. Maria watched the information move across her ex's face in stages. First confusion, his eyes flicking between Maria on the ground and Lawrence standing over her like a monument. Then disbelief, because the woman he'd known lived in a studio apartment with water-stained ceilings and worked 2 jobs just to afford groceries. Then something worse than fear. Recognition of consequence. "I don't," her ex started, but Lawrence raised one hand and the words died in his throat. The gesture was minimal, almost lazy, but the 4 men in suits shifted their weight in response. A subtle redistribution of readiness that made the air feel suddenly heavier. One of them, the youngest, with a scar through his eyebrow, took a single step forward and then stopped, waiting. "You put your hands on her," Lawrence said. Still quiet, still controlled. He tilted his head slightly, rain running down his neck, and Maria saw what her ex was seeing. A man who had hurt people before and would hurt them again without losing a single night's sleep over it. Outside my club, in front of my employees, in front of cameras that I own. Her ex's mouth opened but nothing came out. His eyes darted to the security guard, looking for confirmation that this was real, that this was happening. The guard had turned completely away now, facing the brick wall like it was the most fascinating architecture he'd ever seen. "I didn't know," her ex managed finally. She didn't say. She shouldn't have to." The words cut through his excuses like they were tissue paper. Lawrence moved then, not toward the ex but toward Maria, and she watched her former abuser flinch backwards so hard he nearly tripped over his own feet. Lawrence extended his hand to Maria, palm up, waiting, not pulling, not demanding, offering. She took it, felt the calluses on his fingers, felt the strength in the way he pulled her up, steady and sure but not rough, giving her control of the movement. Her knees protested, and her dress clung to her legs, heavy with rainwater, but she stood. Lawrence's thumb brushed across her cheekbone where the bruise was already forming, his jaw tightening fractionally. Then he shrugged out of his jacket, black, expensive, still warm from his body, and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture completed the transformation. Maria Cabrera, the woman her ex had beaten in a parking lot 5 years ago, the woman he'd just thrown to the ground like garbage, was gone. In her place stood Maria Xiong, wrapped in $10,000 of Italian tailoring, standing beside a man whose presence turned city blocks into territories. "Do you understand what you've done?" Lawrence asked, looking at her ex for the first time with something approaching curiosity. Not anger. Curiosity, like he was examining an insect that had wandered somewhere it didn't belong. Her ex was shaking now, hands out in front of him like he was trying to physically push away reality. "Look, I was drunk. I didn't mean we used to. She's not yours." Lawrence's voice dropped lower, took on an edge that made 2 of his men shift their stance. "She was never yours. You just took until she learned to leave." The rain filled the silence that followed. Somewhere down the street, a car alarm went off and then cut short, like even it knew better than to draw attention right now. Lawrence turned to the man with the scar. "Close the street. Both ends. I don't want anyone interrupting." The man nodded once and spoke into his radio, already moving. Maria's ex took another step back, then another, his eyes searching desperately for an exit that didn't exist. The Mercedes formed a wall behind him. The locked club doors blocked his left. The suited men covered his right. Lawrence had turned the entire street into a cage, and he'd done it without raising his voice once. Lawrence reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The motion was casual, almost bored, like he was checking the time or scrolling through messages. He tapped the screen twice, and somewhere above them, Maria heard the mechanical whir of cameras adjusting focus. "I have 4 angles of what just happened," Lawrence said, turning the phone so her ex could see the screen. 4 video feeds, clear despite the rain, showing the shove, the punch, Maria collapsing. High definition. Time-stamped. Already backed up to 3 separate servers. Her ex stared at the footage, his face going slack. "I also have," Lawrence continued, pocketing the phone, "your name, your address, your employer, your vehicle registration, and your banking information. I've had these for approximately 6 minutes. Do you know how I got them that fast? The question hung in the rain-soaked air. Her ex didn't answer. Couldn't. Because I own the company that provides security software to most of the financial institutions in this city. Because the parking garage across the street uses my facial recognition systems. Because when you walked into my club tonight, you walked into a building where every door lock, every camera, every piece of digital infrastructure reports to me. Lawrence took one step closer. Not aggressive, just closing distance. You hit my wife in the only place in this entire city where I have absolute, documented, unquestionable proof of what you did. He smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. You couldn't have chosen worse if you'd tried. Maria watched her ex's knees start to buckle. He caught himself, but barely. I'm sorry, he said, the words tumbling out desperate and automatic. I'm so fucking sorry. I was drunk. I didn't know, please. You're apologizing to the wrong person. Lawrence stepped aside, creating a clear line between Maria and her ex. The suited men remained perfectly still, but Maria felt the shift in their attention. This wasn't Lawrence's moment anymore. It was hers. Her ex looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw him trying to find the woman he'd known. The one who apologized when he was angry. The one who made herself small. The one who believed his version of reality because fighting it took more energy than she had. That woman was gone. Maria, he said, her name breaking in the middle. Please. Tell him it was a mistake. Tell him we have history, that things are complicated. They're not complicated, she said quietly. You hit me then. You hit me now. That's not complicated. That's a pattern. I was trying to talk to you. You put your hands on me. You left without. You put me in the hospital. Each sentence was a door closing. Each truth a lock sliding home. She watched him cycle through his usual tactics. Deflection, minimization, rewriting the narrative, and watched them all fail against the simple, undeniable facts. Lawrence hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He was letting Maria dismantle her ex with nothing but honesty, and the ex was realizing, maybe for the first time in his life, that he'd never had power over her. He'd just had her fear, and she wasn't afraid anymore. What do you want from me? Her ex whispered finally, his voice hollow. Maria looked at Lawrence, then back at the man who'd once convinced her she deserved his violence. Everything, she said. Lawrence made a small gesture with 2 fingers, and the man with the scar stepped forward holding a tablet. He angled it so Maria's ex could see the screen, then began swiping through documents with methodical precision. Your employment contract, the man said, his voice flat and professional. Terminated as of 10 minutes ago. Your supervisor received an email from his regional director. Something about company liability and character concerns. Her ex's face went white. You can't. Your lease agreement. Another swipe. Your landlord is reviewing violations of the building's conduct policy. You have 30 days to vacate. Maybe less. That's not legal. Your gym membership, your credit cards, your car insurance. Each swipe was another door closing. All currently under review for terms of service violations. Funny how many contracts have morality clauses buried in the fine print. Lawrence watched this unfold with the same expression someone might wear while watching paint dry. Disinterested, clinical. The man with the scar was doing exactly what he'd been trained to do, and Lawrence trusted the process enough not to micromanage it. This is insane, her ex said, but his voice had lost all its conviction. You can't just destroy someone's life because... Because what? Lawrence interrupted, his tone genuinely curious. Because they committed assault? In public? On camera? Please, finish that sentence. Tell me what justification you think exists. The rain kept falling. Her ex looked around wildly, searching for someone who might intervene, might tell him this was disproportionate, might restore some sense of fairness to the situation. The street remained empty. The suited men remained still. The locked club doors stayed locked. You think this is about revenge, Lawrence said, taking a step forward. It's not. Revenge is emotional. Messy. This is just consequence. You hurt someone who couldn't fight back, and you did it because you thought the world was built to protect men like you. He stopped directly in front of her ex, close enough that the height difference became impossible to ignore. But the world changed while you weren't paying attention. And the woman you thought was powerless? Lawrence glanced back at Maria. She married someone who understands that power isn't about shouting or hitting or proving you're the strongest person in the room. Lawrence's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried more weight than any scream. Power is making a phone call and watching someone's entire existence unravel before they can finish begging. The man with the scar closed the tablet. There's also the matter of the criminal complaint. We have Mrs. Zhang's statement, multiple witnesses, and video evidence. The district attorney is a personal friend. No jail, Lawrence said, cutting off the protest before it could form. Jail would give you something to blame, someone to resent. You'd make yourself the victim of the system. He turned away, dismissing her ex with the gesture. Instead, you're going to spend the next year realizing that every comfort you took for granted, every assumption you made about how the world works, every bit of security you thought was yours by right, all of it was conditional. And the condition was that you didn't put your hands on someone I love. Lawrence walked back to Maria, placed a hand on the small of her back. You failed that condition. Her ex stood in the rain, surrounded by silent men and locked doors, finally understanding what it felt like to be trapped. Maria stepped forward, and Lawrence's hand fell away from her back. She felt his presence behind her, solid, certain, but this moment belonged to her alone. Her ex looked at her with something she'd never seen before. Not rage, not contempt, fear mixed with confusion, like he was trying to reconcile the woman standing in front of him with the one he'd convinced himself existed. "Do you remember what you told me?" Maria asked. Her voice was steady, cutting through the rain. "The last time you hit me. What you said right after." He didn't answer. His eyes darted to Lawrence, to the suited men, looking for an escape from this conversation. "Look at me." Her words cracked like a whip, and his attention snapped back. "What did you say?" I don't remember." "You said, 'This is what you make me do.'" Maria took another step closer. "You said I pushed you to it. That if I'd just listened, just behaved, just been better, you wouldn't have to hurt me." The rain was cold against her skin, but she felt nothing, except the weight of 5 years of silence finally breaking. "I believed you," she continued. "For so long I believed that I was the problem, that if I could just figure out the right way to be, you'd stop. That it was my fault you were angry, my fault you drank, my fault your life wasn't what you wanted it to be." Her ex opened his mouth, but she raised a hand, and he fell silent. "Tell me why you hit me tonight, Maria. Tell me. What did I do? What did I say? What behavior of mine justified putting your fist in my face?" He stood there, water streaming down his face, and for the first time in the years she'd known him, he had no answer. No deflection. No way to twist reality into a shape where he was the victim. "I was drunk," he finally managed. "You were always drunk. Try again. You left me 5 years ago. I left 5 years ago because you broke my ribs." Her voice didn't waver. "What did I do tonight?" The silence stretched. One of the suited men shifted his weight, and the small sound seemed to echo down the empty street. "Nothing." Her ex whispered. "You didn't do anything." "Say it louder." "You didn't do anything." The words came out strangled, desperate. "You were just there, and I was drunk, and I saw you looking happy, and I—" He stopped, but Maria wouldn't let him. "You what?" "I wanted to make you small again." The confession burst out of him like poison from a wound. "I wanted you to remember what you were before, what you—" His voice broke. "I couldn't stand that you left and became someone. That you were fine without me, better without me." Maria felt something crack open in her chest, but it wasn't pain. It was release. "You hit me because you were weak," she said, each word precise and final. "Because seeing me whole made you feel like nothing. Because the only way you knew how to feel big was to make someone else feel small." She stepped back, putting distance between them. "I didn't leave because I was weak. I left because I was strong enough to save my own life. And you spent 5 years thinking I was the one who needed saving." Her ex collapsed to his knees in the rain, shoulders shaking. Maria turned her back on him and walked toward Lawrence. She didn't look back. Lawrence made one final gesture, and 2 of the suited men moved toward her ex with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. They didn't touch him roughly. Didn't need to. They simply positioned themselves on either side, waiting for him to stand on his own. Her ex looked up at Maria one last time, rain and something else running down his face. "Where are they taking me?" Lawrence answered before Maria could. "There's a bus station on the edge of the city. You'll be on the first one heading east. Your belongings will be packed and shipped within the week. A cashier's check for 2 months' rent will be waiting at the station, enough to start over somewhere else." "You're exiling me?" Disbelief crept back into her ex's voice, the last remnants of his entitlement surfacing even now. "You can't just— I'm giving you a choice." Lawrence's voice remained level, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "Take the bus and build a new life somewhere you don't have a reputation. Or stay in this city and watch every door close in your face. Every job application ignored. Every apartment rental denied. Every familiar place suddenly unwelcoming." He paused, letting that sink in. "The video of what you did tonight will never go public if you leave. If you stay, it becomes very public. Your name attached. Your face clear. That's not a threat. It's a guarantee. You put your hands on my wife in front of cameras I control. What happens to that footage is entirely dependent on your next decision." Maria watched her ex do the math, watched him realize he was being offered the closest thing to mercy he was going to get. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't justice. It was simply removal, surgical and complete. "How long?" her ex asked, his voice hollow. "How long what? How long before I can come back?" Lawrence looked at Maria, deferring to her. She felt the weight of the question, felt the power of being able to decide this man's future, the way he'd once tried to decide hers. She could have said a year, 5 years. Could have given him hope that eventually, with time and distance, he might be allowed to return. Instead, she said, never. The word hung in the air like a verdict. "You don't get to come back," she continued, surprised by how calm she felt. "You don't get to run into me at a coffee shop in 10 years and apologize. You don't get closure or redemption or the satisfaction of knowing I forgave you. You just get gone." Her ex's face crumpled, but Maria felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not guilt. Just the clean, clear certainty that this was right. The two suited men guided him toward the waiting Mercedes, and he didn't resist. As they loaded him into the back seat, Maria saw him look back one final time. Not at her, she realized, but at the club entrance, at the golden light spilling from inside, at the life he'd thought he could crash back into with violence and entitlement. The door closed with a solid thunk that sounded like punctuation. The Mercedes pulled away from the curb, its taillights disappearing into the rain-slicked street, carrying away 5 years of fear and all the what-ifs Maria had carried like stones in her chest. Lawrence's remaining men began dispersing with the same quiet efficiency they'd arrived with. The street barriers came down. The club doors unlocked with a hydraulic hiss. From inside, music started filtering out again, muted at first, then louder, as if the building itself was exhaling. The head of security emerged from wherever he'd been hiding, caught Lawrence's eye, and nodded once. An understanding passed between them. This night would be forgotten, at least officially. No incident reports. No police involvement. Just a problem that had solved itself. Lawrence turned to Maria, and the hardness in his expression melted away. He reached up, gently touching the bruise on her cheek, his jaw tightening again at the evidence of damage. "Are you okay?" he asked, and there was no performance in the question. Just genuine concern. Maria thought about it. Really thought about it. Her face hurt. Her knees ached. Her dress was ruined, clinging to her skin with cold insistence. By any objective measure, she'd just been assaulted, humiliated, thrown to the ground in front of strangers. But standing there in the rain, wrapped in Lawrence's jacket, watching the taillights of her past disappear into the distance, she realized something fundamental had shifted. "Yeah," she said, and meant it. "I really am." Lawrence smiled, the expression transforming his face from dangerous to almost gentle. He offered her his arm, and she took it, letting him guide her toward the remaining Mercedes. As they walked, Maria felt the rain washing over her, cold and clean and relentless. It ran through her hair, down her neck, carrying away the taste of blood and the weight of old fear. By the time they reached the car, she felt lighter than she had in years. She paused before getting in, looking back at the club entrance one last time. A new couple was already approaching, laughing about something, completely unaware of what had just happened on this exact spot. Life moved on. The city kept breathing. And Maria Cabrera, Maria Siong, was finally, completely free. She slid into the Mercedes, and Lawrence closed the door behind her with care. The rain continued falling, but she was already dry inside. Thanks for watching. Please like, comments, and subscribe.